The SCP Foundation is responsible for containing some of the most dangerous forces in the world. Without them, we'd be at the mercy of the Plague Doctor, walking through the world and killing with a touch. Anyone could be snapped up by SCP-106 and dragged to a painful death in his pocket dimension lair. There would be no one to stop SCP-682 from devouring all living things in sight, and no one to hold back the dreaded Scarlet King from breaching our world and destroying life as we know it. We owe them a lot for sure, and they've earned at least a thank you card and an edible arrangement. But containing the anomalies of the world comes at a pretty steep cost. They're essentially fighting a war against a whole host of world-ending entities, and when you're at war, there are bound to be casualties. For some people and creatures out there, the most terrifying monster isn't 096 just trying to swallow them whole for looking at its face, or 173 just waiting for them to turn their back so it can snap their neck. For the unfortunates that find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, the scariest monster in the world is the SCP Foundation itself. A decade ago, the SCP Foundation was attempting to recapture SCP-682, which had breached containment and was tearing its way through the southern Congo region. Unable to contain the monster by other means, and desperate to stop it from killing any more civilians, the Foundation decided to implement some rather extreme measures. They deployed a variety of chemical agents and poisonous gases in an attempt to slow the creature down, but they had no effect. As the enormous reptile stomped its way toward a nearby river, with a highly populated village waiting on the other side, the Foundation made the decision to take things up a notch. They launched an aerial strike, deploying several aircrafts to drop explosives on the area around the river. They destroyed large portions of the riverbank, but the environmental impact was considered to be a necessary evil. When the smoke finally cleared and the deafening roars of the beast had gone quiet, they stopped their bombing campaign and dispatched Foundation operatives to the scene. There they found the bones of SCP-682, which were quickly brought into custody before the creature could begin to heal itself. The mission was considered a success, and they were ready to pull out all of their staff and head back to the nearest Foundation site, when one officer spotted something floating in the nearby river. It looked like a group of human corpses face down in the water, their bodies badly burned. Concerned that civilians from a nearby village had been inadvertently present for the bombing campaign, a team of officers was sent to investigate the river more closely. What they found was not a group of dead humans, but something else entirely. They were, all along the riverbank and floating in the water, approximately 212 specimens of a previously unknown humanoid species. The bodies were clustered in groups of 3 to 5, appearing to belong to the same family unit or social group. Many of them were frozen in positions of fear or attempt to defend themselves, with some observing personnel comparing them to the victims of the Pompeii eruption, stuck in their final terrified moments. What appeared to be parents and children held on to each other. Some covered their faces, others lay in a fetal position. It seemed that they had known something was coming to kill them, but they did not have the time or the understanding necessary to escape it. Several of the bodies were removed from the river for autopsy and examination in order to understand more about this new, possibly already extinct species. They were humanoid organisms with an indeterminable genus and species. They resembled tall, thin humans with absolutely no body hair and elongated limbs. The most unusual aspect of the creatures was in their mouths. Their teeth were serrated and sharp, resembling those of a crocodile. In spite of these monstrous teeth, an autopsy revealed that there was no human flesh present in any of the creatures' stomachs, instead suggesting a diet of fish, livestock, and whatever else they could peacefully scavenge. Every last corpse was removed from the area and incinerated, to prevent any civilians from coming across them and asking questions. Just when the Foundation personnel were finally packing up and getting ready to leave the river once and for all, they heard something. It was a mournful sound. Something between a man bellowing and a wild animal yelping in pain. Something nearby was still very much alive, and it was screaming. The officers followed the sound and spotted one surviving specimen of the crocodile people lying along the bank of the river. It was holding its face in its hands, curled up into a ball near the water, and it was wailing in agony. There were no visible injuries on the creature's body, but it was clearly extremely distressed. One officer attempted to approach the creature, calling out to it that he meant no harm and wanted to get it some medical attention. It looked up at the officer with wide eyes, and its cries went quiet. The officer grabbed his weapon, afraid that the creature might suddenly rush him, but instead it ran into the river. It jumped into the water, plunging beneath the surface, and began thrashing around. After a moment of watching it struggle, the officer realized what was happening. The creature was trying to drown itself. He abandoned protocol completely at that moment, diving into the water and pulling the struggling creature back to shore. It coughed up water for several minutes, all the while trying to crawl back into the water. When the creature had finally calmed down, it was brought into Foundation custody with no further resistance. It appeared to be the last living member of whatever strange human-crocodile hybrid species was living in that river, and it was designated SCP-4049. Since it was brought into Foundation custody, SCP-4049's behavior has been largely very consistent. Some SCPs are constantly attempting to escape from their containment or killing an endless revolving door of D-Class personnel. But 4049 is not one of those anomalies. It is not aggressive in spite of its crocodilian characteristics, and it's content to eat the food provided by the Foundation. It is fed a diet of raw meat, mostly beef and goat, which is provided fresh daily. The Foundation was curious to see if the creature could be pushed to be aggressive if its circumstances were made a little less comfortable. They deprived it of food for several days, but it did not seem to notice or even care much aside from occasionally looking at the door to see if new food had come. They tried sleep deprivation next, blaring a loud siren sound over the speakers in the containment chamber anytime the creature was observed lying down or closing its eyes. It became listless and visibly exhausted, but did not act out violently at this either. After this testing, its ordinary feeding and sleep schedule was resumed. For the most part, all that SCP-4049 does is eat and sleep. There is, however, one notable exception. At random intervals, SCP-4049 will begin to cry, sobbing intensely and appearing to be in a state of overwhelming distress. Its cries are so loud that they can be heard from several halls away and have caused hearing damage in personnel in the room with it. There is no way to stop the creature from crying once it has started, though providing it with a hot cup of tea, a soft blanket, or a hug from a particularly brave and eager D-Class has caused it to cry a bit more quietly. Once it is finished crying after several hours of non-stop weeping, it will lie down on the ground and not cry anymore for weeks at a time. For a time, SCP-4049 was considered to be lacking human intelligence, and its containment procedures were changed to reflect that. It was held in the standard humanoid containment chamber in the light containment wing of Site-619, with soundproof walls. Because it displayed no threatening behavior, it was considered unnecessary to have any guards placed outside 4049's chamber. However, after Incident 6415-01, the Foundation's understanding of the creature changed dramatically. The incident occurred when several D-Class personnel were sent into 4049's containment chamber to feed it, and they found a harrowing sight. On the wall of the chamber, the entity had scratched a message with its fingernails. Its fingertips were bloodied and torn, its hands noticeably wounded from what must have been a great deal of effort. It did not acknowledge the personnel that entered the room. Instead, it just sat on the floor, staring at its work on the wall, cradling its injured hands and crying. Its shoulders shook with the force of its sobs, and its tears fell to the ground pooling around it. The D-Class personnel were later unable to report what they had seen without beginning to cry themselves, but eventually calmed down enough to report what the creature had written. Please bring them back. It was a desperate plea for the Foundation to somehow reunite it with its lost family. They had previously thought the creature to be a simple animal, incapable of understanding its own reality or communicating through clear language. This proved that the creature understood very well what had happened to it, and was feeling the loss of its loved ones fully. One D-Class officer noticed a scrap of paper, likely a piece of butcher paper from one of the creature's previous meals, with a picture drawn on it. It was a crude sketch, but its subject was easily recognizable. It was the southern Congo River where 4049 was first discovered, with 3 creatures splashing in the water. The largest one resembled SCP-4049, and it was swimming alongside a slightly smaller adult of its species and a much smaller creature that appeared to be a juvenile of the same species. Context clues indicated that this was a drawing of SCP-4049's family, its partner, and their child. At first, the Foundation researchers were uncertain who exactly the creature was referring to in its initial message, but this drawing made it perfectly clear. It wanted its family back. It is uncertain whether or not the creature is aware that its family is dead, but it clearly feels their absence just the same, and believes the Foundation might have the power to end its suffering. Foundation personnel who were exposed to the details of the incident became inconsolable, falling into a deep bout of depression brought on by a sense of shame and responsibility. When counseling sessions proved ineffective, the emotionally affected staff were given amnestics to wipe their memory of the incident, and of 6415 altogether. One employee, Research Assistant Cheryl Cruz, attempted to release the creature from its containment, insisting that it deserved to roam free. However, when she opened the door to its containment facility, the creature made no move to leave. It just stared at her, tears in its eyes as if it knew that it had nowhere else to go. Research Assistant Cruz was given a powerful amnestic and relieved of her position at the Foundation. Her current whereabouts are unknown. In order to prevent any more reckless behavior from sympathetic staff, the message scratched into the wall was painted over, and the sketch recovered from its chamber was destroyed. But even if the memories and evidence of the creature's pain are gone, anyone walking by its chamber can still hear it weeping. It is uncertain what the containment procedures for SCP-6415 will become. It is not simply an animal, and clearly understands language, though it appears to be incapable of speech. If it could talk, whatever it said would surely be heartbreaking. For now, the entity remains in its cell, serving as a grim reminder of the guilt that weighs on the Foundation's conscience. No matter what they do with 6415, they cannot take back what they did. They cannot lift the weight of the creature's grief, or bring back its lost family. It is the lone survivor, sitting in its Foundation cell, weeping for its broken heart, and begging the Foundation for the one thing it can never do: bring them back. In almost all respects, Kevin O'Reilly is your average 50-something Irish man. He lives in County Cork with his wife, Martha, where he spends his day working at a local accountancy firm, and during his free evenings, he likes to take quiet walks through the nearby woods. There is only one remarkable thing that can be said about Kevin. He was the second human ever to encounter an example of SCP-4199. A dangerous Keter-class anomaly that has the power to knock humanity off the top of the food chain if left unchecked. We know what you're thinking. What about the first human? Don't worry, we'll get to him. But we can assure you, he's anything but unremarkable. Back to Kevin. He was enjoying one of his nightly walks when he heard a horrible shrieking sound in the distance. It sounded like a woman was being murdered, and just hearing it chilled poor Kevin to his core. His first instinct was to run to the woman's aid and do whatever he could, but there was a lurking anxiety under the surface. The echoing memory of an old childhood legend, the Banshee, a monstrous ghostly woman of Irish folklore whose blood-curdling screams always foretell death. But those were all just stories, surely. Grim omens to stop children from straying too far from the path. Kevin took his first brave step in the direction of that awful screaming, repeating the quiet mantra of, "There's no such thing as monsters," to himself again and again. If only he knew just how wrong he was. He ran deeper into the forest, following the awful sounds. Whoever this woman was, she certainly had some pipes on her. The screaming had been going on for minutes on end now, and it didn't seem to show any signs of subsiding. The sky above had darkened from everything to full-on night by the time Kevin reached the source of the screaming. Kevin found himself in a clearing in the forest, but in all his years of walking down here, he'd never seen it before. There was a ramshackle old cottage, rotten with age and damp, and next to it, a rusty old hut made from corrugated iron, like a kind of oversized chicken coop. From the tinny, echoing quality of the screams, he knew that they were coming from inside the hut. Was a woman being held captive here? Kevin was a smart man. He approached the tin hut quietly, not saying a word. If this woman had indeed been captured and was now being held against her will, It wouldn't help the situation to potentially alert her captor to his presence. This quick thinking is the reason that Kevin O'Reilly is still alive today. Because when he arrived outside the tin hut and peered in through the window, what he saw inside was not a woman. In fact, it wasn't even human. The beast that Kevin saw inside the hut was nothing short of a crime against nature. A twisted abomination that was only vaguely humanoid. Its bloated, fleshy body dripped with some kind of viscous fluid, and it looked more like a plucked rotten chicken than a person. The creature was shrieking and wailing, its huge body convulsing in the coop. It was making a gurgling, gagging noise, like something was strangling it. Kevin felt like he was going to be sick, but the monster beat him to it. It doubled over, its wretched, lipless mouth stretched open to freakish proportions and started to vomit something out. It was a gray, leathery mass, covered in dark red blood that soon flopped out onto the ground, among a number of other masses that looked just like it. The creature then gave one final wail and spewed out a red stream of blood and bile onto the masses. That's when Kevin realized what he was looking at. Eggs. A pile of big, unnatural eggs. The foul-smelling bile that the creature had just vomited up had no effect on the eggs, but it seemed to burn and corrode the surrounding environment. It hissed against the metal as thin wisps of steam rose from the scorch marks. Kevin was horrified, but also entranced by the bizarre sight, until the creature stood back up and began to turn towards him. Kevin didn't let his morbid curiosity get the better of him. He turned and sprinted out of the forest, knowing that if he lingered for even a second longer, he wouldn't return home alive. He ran, and finally heard the wailing fade into the distance behind him. This was the first ever outside brush with a specimen of SCP-4199, also known as Humans Refuted. Sadly, it would be far from the last, and would remain one of the rare few that wasn't deadly. When Kevin got back to town, he immediately told everyone what he saw. There's a monster in the woods, and it's breeding. He even told the local newspaper, which printed the headline, "Beast Sighted in Local Forest." It was enough to get the SCP Foundation's attention. Field agents were sent into the town proper to suppress the information leaking about the creature and gather any additional information they needed to assess whether they were dealing with a real anomaly here or just another crank. Straight away though, the agents could tell from Kevin's demeanor that he had seen something truly awful. He was given amnestics, and Mobile Task Force Omega-19 were dispatched to secure and contain the creatures that Kevin had seen. They had 12 well-armed personnel, trained and prepared to deal with anything. Or so they thought. They were led by Corporal Duncan, a seasoned MTF operative, and they used state-of-the-art night vision technology to gain a tactical advantage in the dead of night. All they had to work on though was the visual description provided by Mr. O'Reilly. It didn't take long for them to find the same clearing out in the woods. There was the rotten old cottage and the metal coop, just like Kevin had described. Two younger MTF members, Private McLeod and Private Langley, were eager to take the lead and prove themselves as they explored the dilapidated nightmare of a house. Once inside, they heard strange noises, what they assumed must have been footsteps coming from deeper in the home. They crept further in, and that's when Private McLeod first noticed it. The shape of a large, pale, bulbous figure at the end of a long hallway, shivering slightly in the cold. Compared to some of the hardened killers he had heard about in combat training, this creature looked like a piece of cake. This half-man, half-chicken. It was almost a walking joke. He leveled his weapon and grinned as he approached the creature, but Private McLeod had made a fatal mistake. He underestimated his enemy. In a later Foundation debriefing interview, Corporal Duncan would report with a dull horror what he saw happen to Private McLeod that terrible day. He'd never seen a smile fade from someone's face so fast. As the creature turned, shrieked, and sprinted down the hallway towards Private McLeod. The poor private barely even had time to raise his gun, his hands quivering with panic. Though even if McLeod had been quicker on the draw, it probably wouldn't have saved him. As the beast approached, it spewed its foul, stinking red bile onto McLeod's face. It was a sudden burning sensation so powerful that he passed out in an instant, his lower face dripping off of his own skull. He was dead in mere moments. Then, the beast leapt forward and began attacking Private Langley, biting and stinging and spewing more of its deadly acidic liquid. By the time it was done, there was barely any of Langley left to retrieve from the house. The 10 surviving task force members opened fire on the creature, but along with being surprisingly fast, it could also apparently take quite a licking. Even when Corporal Duncan managed a direct hit on the creature's chest, blowing a portion of it away, the monster just let out the most awful scream and continued fighting. Corporal Duncan admits that, to this day, that scream and the moonlight shining through the hole in the creature's chest continue to haunt him. When the monster was finally subdued, they were able to take it back to the nearby evac chopper and begin the journey to the nearest containment facility. But things took another terrible turn during that fateful flight. The creature's body began to convulse before vomiting up a pair of large, leathery eggs. Without a moment's hesitation, the eggs began to bulge and tear open, and a pair of rapidly growing SCP-4199 instances crawled out, attacking the mobile task force members huddled together in the cramped confines of the helicopter. Once the second onslaught was over, only 4 of the remaining 10 members of personnel were left alive. The Foundation had discovered a formidable new foe. The specimens were brought back to Site-114 and placed in a modified version of the standard Keter-class containment chamber. It was fitted with acid-resistant steel walls and a series of transparent resin blocks to store the specimens inside for constant observation. But the creatures weren't given Keter-class for nothing. Escape attempts are frequent, and whenever they happen, the number of creatures in containment increases. The most frightening detail of SCP-3199 is the fact that it's impossible to reduce the number of them in existence. Each creature has a unique stomach-like organ inside its body which holds an egg in reserve. While it's possible to destroy one of the creatures, the eggs have proven to be almost indestructible. As a result, when one of them dies, the egg within it hatches and immediately grows into a replacement. And if the creatures are ever allowed to roam free, they begin laying eggs in any unoccupied space they can find, causing their numbers to grow. In theory, if left unchecked, they could supplant the human race with their own species in hardly any time at all. The only solution that the Foundation has found is submerging the creatures in sedative-laced water, as the beasts seem to inherently register water-filled areas as occupied space, and therefore do not begin laying eggs while submerged. But even the Foundation's most optimistic minds still admit this is only a temporary solution. But where did these awful creatures come from? After the chaos of the first mission, the Foundation had dispatched an additional Mobile Task Force Surface Team Delta 029E to perform a second sweep of the house and figure out what had been going on during the 2 decades of preceding silence. Inside, the team managed to collect a number of strange objects to bring back as evidence of the peculiar activities that had taken place there. Among these were a number of chicken carcasses that bore evidence of surgical dissection, a pair of chicken feather quills, and an A5 hardcover notebook labeled New Breed Manifesto. Its writer is believed to be deceased, most likely as a result of SCP-3199. But the final note scrawled inside the book and dated 1973 provides some insight into what had occurred inside that dilapidated shack in Ireland. It reads,
"If you're reading this, then lucky you. 400,000 hours from now, and it'll be warm and wet and warm, and the wonderful versatility of inferior human DNA will birth a better era, a stronger era. One where food and water will be nothing but things of the past as we make and make and make more until I really haven't much time. That's why I envy you so much. You'll have all the time you need. Time will be a thing of all the time will be on, and death will be life. Life new needs things to live. New life will be part of life from now on."
These are the last words of the deranged mad scientist who created SCP-3199, perhaps under the demented belief that somehow they would make the world a better place. Personally, we don't think SCP-4199 have any interest in improving the world. But whether we like it or not, their insane creator is right about one thing. They're our problem now. The SCP Foundation contains a lot of monsters. From SCP-682, the lizard that refuses to die, to SCP-939, a species of pack hunters that steal the voices of their victims. The dangerous predators that occupy the hundreds of containment cells of the Foundation make it their job to hunt and kill innocent people, or worse. But have you ever wondered where some of those monsters come from? The first encounter that the SCP Foundation had with SCP-4049 was on July 14th of 2010. The Foundation operates a massive surveillance network around the entire world. Through the use of AI, delegated duties, and compartmentalized information, they're able to have 911 operators report any calls that seem anomalous in nature while knowing nothing about the Foundation itself. This way, they're able to constantly be aware of anything anomalous going on in the country that gets reported to 911. On July 14th, the Foundation was alerted of a call that likely had an anomalous component. At first, it didn't seem like much. It was a remote address in Wyoming, outside of a small town called Gardnerville, the vacation home of one Richard Sampson, a wealthy businessman in the area, placed right on the slopes. The call was made late in the afternoon by someone purporting to be the groundskeeper of the home while Mr. Sampson was away. He was screaming into the phone, terrified and largely incoherent, but the operator made out something about a monster attacking the house. There was a lot of noise in the background, sounds of shouting, destruction, and what sounded like animalistic roars and grunts. The 911 operator moved the call up, and it didn't take long for the Foundation to determine that something strange was going on here. They dispatched a handful of agents, deep undercover as officers with the Wyoming Highway Patrol, to the address of the home where the call had come from. After about half an hour, the agents called back into HQ. The scene they had found was nothing short of gruesome. Upon arrival, they were greeted with what appeared to be the aftermath of a particularly violent and brief tornado. The entire front section of the ground floor had been shredded, the gardens trampled, and the interior utterly destroyed. The agents picked their way between the wreckage of the home. It functionally didn't exist anymore. The walls were collapsed from being rammed and torn through, and the roof had collapsed in on itself. The broken shards and pieces of furniture and wreckage were everywhere. Despite appearances, this wasn't a tornado. A tornado would have thrown the entire house around. No, this was, as the groundskeeper had said, something alive, monstrous, and very angry. Speaking of the groundskeeper, the Foundation agents began to look for him once they took stock of the damage of the home. At first, they couldn't find him among the massive pieces of debris and assumed the worst. Even if whatever had destroyed the house decided to not kill him, he could easily have been killed by the collapsing house, buried under rubble, or a dozen other things. They picked through the ruins, calling out that they were from the police and were here to help. Eventually, after another half hour of searching, they heard something. What sounded like crying and whispering became audible as the wind died down. The agents honed in on the noise and found it was coming from one of the larger piles of rubble. After getting some equipment, they were able to heft up the piece of the collapsed roof and found the groundskeeper underneath, curled into a ball and talking to himself. He seemed to be in some kind of panicked fugue state, not responding to the agents trying to get through to him. They wrapped him in a shock blanket and put him in the back of one of their patrol cars. But even after that, they couldn't get anything of use out of him. He was just shaking and muttering something about monsters. Eventually, he was given amnestics to forget about the incident entirely and recovered. After the agents reported back to HQ, a new issue popped up. They weren't the only ones who knew about this. A news website a few counties away had the story. The Foundation quickly put out a cover story. The house had probably been destroyed by a group of grizzly bears, possibly rabid. They had the local government issue a warning advising local residents to stay inside and out of the wilderness until the animals could be tracked and euthanized. And that's exactly what the Foundation did. Mobile Task Force Epsilon 6, the Village Idiots, an MTF that specializes in taking on anomalous threats in remote rural areas and small towns, were dispatched to track and contain or terminate whatever had destroyed that mansion. The creature had left a strong trail of tracks, scent, and general destruction, and the troopers followed it north for hours into another dense forest, where they discovered the gigantic, hulking creature while it was asleep and shot it. It was huge, with rippling muscles on all four legs and no fur to speak of, but the most striking feature was a frighteningly human face. The agents resolved to let the researchers handle the autopsy and busied themselves with the other things in that forest. There was an old abandoned arms factory that the creature seemed to have come from. The agents descended into the decrepit abandoned building, following the creature's trail right into the basement. There they found a large steel door, and behind it, the anomaly that would eventually be called SCP-4049. It was strange. It seemed to be some kind of massive, empty room looking up into the sky, even though they were deep underground. Not entirely empty. The dirt ground had a series of concentric rings of gravestones in it, all facing inward. The agents retreated once they realized they had walked into a spatial anomaly and called for backup. The Foundation quickly flew in researchers and a containment team to figure out what the anomaly was, and to ensure no one else got into the factory while they figured that out. The basement of the factory became a sort of base of operations for the large crew of research and security personnel assigned to SCP-4049. After making sure there were no other of the monsters, designated SCP-4049-1 instances in the nearby forest, the researchers began to experiment on it. They determined that the room on the other side of the hallway was in an extra-dimensional space. Members of D-Class personnel were sent in with GPS trackers, and even though they could still be heard fine on the radio, the GPS trackers failed totally. Obviously, the fact that you could see the sky from an underground room was anomalous, but attempts to dig into where the room should have been from the surface also led to nothing but more dirt. From inside, the D-Class were able to give a detailed report on the room as they walked around. It was perfectly circular and pretty large, about 30 feet across, give or take. A tall white wall ringed the room's border and was perfectly smooth and impossible to get a grip on enough to climb. Cold, hard marble. The floor of the room wasn't marble though. It seemed to be regular dirt. The D-Classes were ordered by researchers to get samples of what they could, and they scooped a little dirt into sample bags. But as soon as the subjects stepped back over the threshold into the corridor of SCP-4049, the sample bags they collected spontaneously combusted, going up in flames. Any chemical analysis of its composition was, of course, impossible. The researchers resolved to get what information they could of just looking at SCP-4049 first, and there was still a lot to look at. The D-Class inspected the rings of gravestones inside SCP-4049. There were just two at the moment. A larger ring contained a smaller ring. Inside the smaller ring, there was a circular empty space a few feet wide. Most of the graves were unfilled and unmarked, just a patch of dirt turned over, but about a dozen of them had a gravestone at their head, made of that same white marble substance the walls were made from. They weren't fancy, just a simple white rectangle, stamped with some strange symbols. The D-Class took photos and sent them to the researchers, who recognized the markings as an ancient word in Greek, hound. The researchers were admittedly baffled by what this could mean for SCP-4049, but decided to figure out the connection using the evidence they had. The corpse of the SCP-4049-1 instance. The researchers placed the huge corpse inside the factory, creating a secure space to perform the autopsy. Then a team of doctors began cutting into it with scalpels. Or they tried anyway. They quickly realized that the skin of the creature was far too thick to be breached with scalpels, and resorted to long, sharpened knives. They discovered quite a few things about the instance's anatomy, along with why and how it was able to do and absorb so much damage. It was a quadruped, walking on 4 limbs. The forward one seemed to be in the shape of arms with elbows and wrists, but also had clawed paws like a dog's. The back legs were thick and heavily muscled, and digitigrade, again, just like a dog. so they could be used to leap and jump great distances. Once they cut away the skin, the researchers noticed that it was indeed much thicker than they expected it to be. Human skin is only about 2 millimeters thick, but this was a full centimeter throughout, as well as incredibly tough and gamey. Internally, the structure was all wrong. It seemed almost human-like, but with a few key differences to suit the vastly changed exterior body. The spine was much thicker and wider, as well as being curved to fit the four-legged structure. There seemed to be redundant organs. The researchers theorized they were backups, like the secondary heart they found inside the creature's innards. It could serve as a backup if the main heart stopped working or was damaged, or it could work together with the main heart to improve the instance's performance during physical activity. There didn't seem to be any kind of reproductive system. It wasn't surgically removed, it just wasn't there at all, like it had magically disappeared. And inside the thing's head, the skull was different. The mouth was much wider and larger, and it didn't take long for the researchers to figure out why. When rooting around in its mouth, they quickly discovered it had an extra set of sharp teeth behind its main set. All unnerving, slightly disturbing discoveries, but the most frightening wasn't something they found inside the instance. It was something they noticed immediately upon containing it. Its face was human. It had been morphed, of course, to fit the altered skull, but there were 2 eyes, a forehead, a nose, lips. It was inarguably a human face. While the researchers sent for a DNA test, they were disturbed but not surprised to discover what they had already been expecting. The instance was entirely genetically human, not a changed species or close relative. This creature had once been a regular human being, like you or I. The researchers had just sent the DNA sample off to check if there was a match in the criminal database, when suddenly the lights went red, the doors sealed, and the site's alarms began to sound. At that moment, the steel door leading to SCP-4049 flung open, and another SCP-4049-1 instance bounded out into the corridor on all fours. It set its beady eyes on 3 members of the mobile task force, standing on the far side of the long corridor. For a moment, it didn't do anything, then it let out a long screech that echoed around the entire factory. Its rear legs tensed up, and it began to bound down the hallway toward them. All of the security guards opened fire with their machine guns on the anomaly, trying to bring it down. It shrugged off the bullets like they were raindrops and didn't so much as slow down. Meanwhile, the 24 other security personnel in the facility were rapidly grabbing their weapons and armor from their lockers before rocketing down the stairs to the corridor. By the time they made it down, it was too late. The instance was using its claws and jaws to tear 2 of the 3 poor members of the task force to shreds. It wasn't eating them, but it was attacking them with enough anger and malice that there wasn't going to be much left when it was done. The 3rd member of the task force had fallen and was backing away from the anomaly in fear. The remaining members of the task force opened fire, smothering the SCP-4049-1 instance in a hail of bullets. The sudden, overwhelming firepower caught it off guard, and after a few seconds of sustained gunfire, it fell to the ground, dead. Once the Foundation realized the active danger that SCP-4049 presented, they decided not to take any chances with containment. The 50-meter-long corridor leading to SCP-4049 from the basement elevator was fortified. An airlock was installed on the far side, separating it from the rest of the factory. Then, motion detectors were set every few meters throughout the hallway, attached to a series of deterrents. If an SCP-4049-1 instance smashed out of the steel door, it would trip the alarms and activate everything from a supersonic sound cannon to sentry guns and a machine gun emplacement. And if none of those worked, the entire corridor could be pumped full of nerve gas, guaranteeing the death of the instance without risking the lives of any personnel. This kill corridor was to be guarded by the Applied Task Force Iota-9 to ensure that no SCP-4049-1 instance would survive its escape. But after the corridor was retrofitted, the Foundation had a bigger problem. Where were these SCP-4049-1 instances coming from to begin with? They performed another DNA test on the new instance. Its face was different, so it seemed logical that it was a different person. When the results came back, the researchers were surprised to find that not just one, but both of the samples had DNA matches in the national database. Both were men from the tri-state area who had mysteriously died or disappeared in the past few months, while at some kind of religious service. They were both avid big game hunters, with an interest in shooting moose, bears, and elk. And most important, they had both been the subject of a fire-related incident. One had been presumed dead when his house burned down. The other had simply vanished, with his car being found hours later on fire by the side of a highway. In both cases, a body was never recovered, but the authorities did find a strange, stone-tipped arrow driven into the ground nearby. Over the following months, the Foundation observed a number of these strange events happening in Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, and like clockwork, every time it happened, a new headstone appeared over one of the previously unmarked graves inside SCP-4049, saying the same Greek word, hound. On top of all of that, almost every time a man in the area disappeared under these specific circumstances and a grave was created, an SCP-4049-1 instance would appear inside SCP-4049 sometime in the following 2 months. Buried within the soil circle in the center of the room. It would claw its way out of the dirt, smash open the steel door to SCP-4049, and race down the hallway trying to kill and destroy whatever was in front of it until it was gunned down. But in one instance, that didn't happen. On September 17th of 2015, the Foundation had gotten into the rhythm of containing SCP-4049, so they weren't startled or caught off guard when an agent with the Highway Patrol reported finding a flaming truck near a hunting ground. In the bed was an elk carcass, with a stone-tipped arrow lodged deep into the meat. Applied Task Force Iota-9 at the factory began to prepare for an imminent appearance from an SCP-4049-1 entity within the following weeks, and established a round-the-clock guard in the kill corridor. But it never came. By December, nothing had happened at all. The Foundation made the decision. A D-Class would be sent into SCP-4049 with a camera and radio, in the hopes of manually initiating the event to occur. The D-Class subject wasn't given very specific instructions, just fitted with a body camera, a 2-way radio, and told to listen to all instructions on the headset. The researchers ordered him forward, until he reached the other side of the hallway, where he was to open the steel door leading to SCP-4049 and enter. When he entered, everything looked the same as the Foundation expected it to. The same gravestones, walls, and dirt. He moved towards the center of the room to the dirt circle, but suddenly stopped, looking around. When the researchers asked why, he reported hearing the sound of dogs barking for a moment, before the researchers told him to keep walking. When he stopped in the center of the room, he again radioed in, feeling that someone was there. The camera didn't pick anyone up, but he insisted that there was an odd feeling just before the audio stream suddenly cut out. A burst of static interference drowned everything else out and was slowly winded down. The D-Class couldn't be heard anymore, but a strange female voice was on the line, speaking to the Foundation. She mentioned that the Foundation had been ruining her pets for far too long. The Foundation demanded the speaker identify themselves, but she just scoffed, indignant at what she called human arrogance. Right after that, all audio feeds were cut out permanently. This mysterious woman was designated as SCP-4049-2. 7 seconds after they cut out, the largest SCP-4049-1 instance ever recorded exited SCP-4049, standing at almost 11 meters high. All of the deterrents were activated, but even then, it still took all of them combined with machine gun fire from the Applied Task Force to bring the creature down. No remains of the D-Class and no traces of whoever was speaking on the radio were ever found by the researchers. It can be dangerous to stand between someone and their beloved pets.
SCP-682 must be destroyed as soon as possible. So begins the SCP Foundation file on the dreaded SCP-682, a highly intelligent reptilian monster that has, despite the Foundation's best efforts, proved impossible to kill. It may not be the most dangerous SCP out there, considering that some are capable of eliminating entire realities, but it's one of the most iconic. And you've probably heard tales of the monster that death forgot, and you know exactly why everyone is so afraid of the so-called hard-to-kill reptile. It's been subjected to some of the most deadly weapons and traps the Foundation could devise, and survived attacks from some of its deadliest fellow SCPs. But before we tell you about the Foundation's many failed assassination attempts against the so-called hard-to-kill Reptile, we need a little more groundwork on what this creature even is. The first thing to know about SCP-682 is that this thing wants you and everything you know dead. Unlike some other creatures like SCP-096 and SCP-173, which are murderous but exhibit no real higher processing skills, SCP-682 possesses cunning, advanced reasoning, and even human-level logical intelligence. SCP-682 can engage you in conversation, but just talking to the creature calmly and cordially will sometimes cause it to enter its rage state, where it becomes even more dangerous and volatile. The beast is perpetually kept in a tank of powerful hydrochloric acid, melting its tissue to prevent it from reaching its full potential and going on a rampage. The creature's most terrifying asset, and the reason it's proven impossible to terminate thus far, is its incredible adaptability to any and all external stimuli. 682 is a reactive being, capable of not only surviving and regenerating from all attacks, but often incorporating those attacks into its own wide arsenal. In other words, if you're hoping to kill this thing, you better kill it on the first hit. Because if you don't, you better believe it's gonna hit you back 100 times harder. This brings us to the main event. Some of the SCP Foundation's most ambitious and frightening attempts to terminate SCP-682, or even understand how it could theoretically be terminated. There are quite literally too many unsuccessful attempts for us to list them all here, so think of this as a highlight reel of the Foundation's most prominent failures. 682 was first cross-tested with SCP-017, a humanoid shadow entity shown to be able to consume matter with its shadows and leave no traces behind. Tests on tissue samples from 682 showed that SCP-017 was able to consume said tissues with no adverse effects. However, when SCP-017 was placed into the containment chamber with the actual creature, 682 let out a horrific roar that was so loud it damaged nearby audio equipment. SCP-017 fled to the corner of the room, and 682, in its rage state, attempted to breach containment. Agents managed to suppress and remove the creature, but no meaningful damage was logged. Attempt failed. SCP-173, the killer statue, was later brought in, hoping that its thus far impeccable track record for killing would hold strong. The second that 173 was introduced into the testing area, 682 retreated to the far wall and began screeching intensely. It was intelligent enough to know what it was dealing with here. While the researchers and guards expected an instantaneous reaction, there was actually a stalemate for over 6 hours, as 682 stared at 173 continuously. Eventually, the tie was broken when agents shot out 682's eyes with high-caliber sniper rifles, breaking the line of sight and causing 173 to attack. Though 682 sustained damage to several parts of its body, while its eyes regenerated, the creature was not killed. It then regenerated a number of eyes all over its body, covered in a clear armored carapace that made them resistant to bullets. The stalemate continued for an additional 12 hours as 682 maintained perpetual eye contact. 173 was eventually removed from the containment unit, and the mission was aborted. Attempt failed. In their desperation, the SCP Foundation restored to bringing in another dangerous and seemingly unkillable monster to take on 682. SCP-096, also known as the Shy Guy. As astute SCP fans will already know, this being kills anything that sees its face, with no known exceptions, and when it enters its attack mode, it's thought to be quite literally unstoppable. Or at least, it was. While SCP-096 was able to destroy 85% of 682's original body mass during their 27-hour battle, it was left mentally broken, wounded, and huddled in the corner. To this day, if ever confronted with SCP-682, the Shy Guy reacts in pure terror, turning away and clawing at its own face. Attempt failed. During a deadly containment breach, SCP-682 also went head-to-head organically with another iconic SCP Hall of Famer, SCP-106, also known as the Old Man. The old man and a shape-shifting psionic anomaly known as SCP-953 broke into 682's containment cell. The old man pulled both of his fellow anomalous combatants into his pocket dimension to continue the battle on his terms. However, despite losing 67% of his body mass during the ensuing pocket dimension showdown, 682 still prevailed, with the old man eventually fleeing back to his cell and 953 being collected and taken away by agents. Once again, SCP-682 continued to hold the title. But it wasn't just cross-testing experiments, intentional or otherwise. The SCP Foundation's quest to kill 682 led them to a number of more conventional murder methods, all with varying degrees of success. Due to SCP-682's highly adaptive abilities, some methods were discounted from the outset. For example, launching a powerful thermonuclear missile at the creature was soundly rejected by O5 Command, on the premise that if the creature wasn't destroyed and evolved to the point where it could shrug off nukes, humanity would be pretty much done for. Other ideas were abandoned just for being too ridiculous, such as one researcher's suggestion to fly the creature through the air and drop it from a considerable height, hoping to kill it with a high-altitude impact. I'm not sure we even need to tell you why that's a terrible idea, but during the experiments on SCP-682, the studies range from honest to incompetent to straight-up evil. One guest researcher fed 2 small innocent children to the creature just to see what would happen. He was then himself fed to the creature for his sadistic behavior, which was viewed as getting in the way of his professional conduct. After all, the Foundation is meant to be cold, not cruel. It was SCP-682 that had the monopoly on cruelty. Memetic kill agents were a resounding failure. They attempted to dismember 682 with a powerful laser, only to have the creature develop reflective surfaces that displaced the beam and caused catastrophic damage to the area around it. They attempted to kill the creature by sucking all the air out of its containment facility and create a vacuum, but it expelled a dangerous gaseous compound that reacted violently and exploded when air was once again introduced into the room. The Foundation used high-precision blades to slice SCP-682 into approximately 12,000 pieces, then separated these pieces. Unsurprisingly, by this point, this attempt also failed. The 12,000 pieces reformed a short while later into the fully operational killing machine we all know and fear. In one particularly frightening display of intelligence and adaptability, the Foundation attempted to kill 682 with extreme heat, but it shielded itself by developing a second carapace composed of solid helium. When personnel entered the room following the failed attempt on the creature's life, it shattered its helium carapace into deadly shards that fired around the room and shredded all Foundation personnel in attendance. It had set a trap, and that trap had been wildly successful. The creature's ability to adapt to seemingly any offense is unparalleled, to the point where Foundation staff have no idea how to classify this creature, whether it's organic, inorganic, or even alive at all based on any definitions we could understand. At every turn, the creature just raised more questions. What is it? Is it possible to destroy it at all by any means? Who was even trying to kill who here? Because it certainly seemed like SCP-682 had a masterful KD ratio by now. More extreme feats of cross-testing continued in the Foundation's growing desperation to eliminate this monster. SCP-162, which is a hypnotic ball of sharp objects, hooks, and high-tension fishing line, was introduced to 682's containment cell. The hooks latched onto the creature and tore huge portions off, including its entire lower jaw and one of its limbs. However, 682 was still able to breach containment, kill 11 people, and badly wound 86 others. It regenerated its severe injuries in no time. The beast was even taken to the domain of the Gate Guardian, one of the proposals for SCP-001. The Guardian had a flaming sword hotter than the sun, capable of destroying its targets on an atomic level. Naturally, SCP-682 survived and regenerated. Perhaps the most fascinating cross-test of all was between 682 and SCP-053, who manifests as a kind, innocent little girl with the unfortunate condition of causing homicidal tendencies in all who come into contact with her for more than 10 minutes. The people with these tendencies would then attempt to harm the girl, but would immediately drop dead shortly after, leaving the girl intact. The researchers present anticipated 2 possible outcomes here. The optimistic outcome, in which 682 enters a rage state, attacks 053, and died for good, and the realistic outcome, in which 682 attacks 053, possibly experiencing some minor injury or nothing at all, and 053 had to be removed from the containment cell. But that didn't happen. What did occur was considerably more shocking than any kind of violence. When 053 entered 682's containment chamber, the monster became uncharacteristically docile. Researchers and staff were baffled and watched with amazement as 053 approached the terrifying, immortal, mass-murdering monster and began to play with it. 682 even allowed 053 to draw on its face with crayons. Researchers thought they must have been dreaming seeing this surreal display play out. 053 even appeared to have affection for this unkillable misanthrope. It was a single act in defiance of everything they thought they knew. When Foundation personnel entered the containment cell to separate the two, 682 went ballistic and killed multiple guards. 053 also wept, sad at being separated from her new friend. To this day, despite further testing, the Foundation has no idea how or why this happened. Like many details surrounding SCP-682, it's shrouded in deeply frustrating mystery. And so the tale of SCP-682 continues, in spite of the Foundation's best efforts. The monster continues to breach containment and slaughter with some regularity, taking out its seemingly limitless hatred for not only human beings, but anything that dares draw breath. Nobody knows where exactly the creature is from, what its true nature is, or why its ability to adapt and regenerate far exceeds any known organism on this planet. Perhaps one day, through enough research and cross-testing, we can someday answer these questions with scientific precision. But until then, we only have one answer. Hatred never dies. On an ordinary day in 1991, a young man known by the initials JS went on a hike with 4 of his friends on the wooded outskirts of their small town. Everything seemed perfectly normal until JS began to feel a strange sense of familiarity, like he had been in this spot before. He couldn't shake this weird feeling, but thought nothing more of it. Little did he know that this was a sign of deadly things to come. Several hours after first experiencing that sense of deja vu, JS was found by the side of the road, covered in cuts and scratches, with his friends nowhere to be found. This is the story of SCP-939, an unforgettable monster that you'll never remember. There was no way for JS to know that the unsettling feeling he felt and the horrors that followed it were the result of an experiment conducted by the SCP Foundation, an experiment with deadly, unforeseen consequences. JS and his friends were exposed to a substance known only as AMN-C227 as part of a series of tests performed by the SCP Foundation, intended to determine the effectiveness of this substance as a deliberate amnestic. Dealing with as many mysterious, secret creatures and objects as they do, the SCP Foundation has long needed a way to tamper with the memories of those exposed to the Foundation's various prisoners and test subjects. And when the Foundation discovered AMN-C227, it seemed like it might be perfect for this purpose. So where did AMN-C227 come from? Over a year before the incident with JS and his friends, the SCP Foundation captured SCP-939. SCP-939 is a species of endothermic predators that live and hunt in packs. They are designated Keter class and regarded as highly dangerous and hostile to human life. Native to caves, they have no eyes, translucent red skin, and stand at an average of 2.2 meters tall, with an average weight of 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending in 3-fingered claws and a 4th opposable digit resembling a thumb. In addition to their sharp claws, their mouths are filled with red fang-like teeth that reach up to 6 centimeters in length. In place of their absent eyes, they have light-sensitive spots running along their backs, which are covered in spines believed to detect changes in air pressure and flow. In addition to their many other terrifying attributes, the internal anatomy of SCP-939 poses a biological mystery. These creatures have no circulatory system and no digestive tract. That's right, in spite of being predators seemingly acting on a need to feed, they have no stomach. Instead, when they eat, their food builds up in their respiratory system until its presence inhibits function, and then it is regurgitated. In spite of being a creature that should not, under any logical conditions, be able to live, SCP-939 continues to persist, and is even capable of giving birth to live young after a gestation period of 12 months. The SCP Foundation was able to study a litter of these young that were born in captivity in September of 1992, though the creatures remain just as much of a scientific mystery as they were upon first discovery. Everything about them seems to defy the logic of the natural world. which, to be fair, is really nothing new for the Foundation. The respiratory system of SCP-939 was found to exhale small traces of an airborne amnestic substance, given the name AMN-C227. This compound blocks the formation of memories for the duration of exposure to it, plus a 30-minute period following the exposure, give or take a few minutes. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and completely undetectable in the bloodstream after only 60 minutes. AMN-C227 was approved for use as a Class C amnestic by the SCP Foundation in 1990, following some initial tests. However, after one particular incident involving a young man and his friends, the official use of AMN-C227 was suspended. JS and 3 of his 4 friends were previously given a dose of AMN-C227, though the details of why they were given the amnestic has since been stricken from the record. Several months after being exposed to AMN-C227, JS and his friends went out on their ill-fated hiking trip. While hiking, JS was suddenly overcome with a sense of déjà vu. When he mentioned it to his friends, 3 of them agreed that they had felt it too. One of the group, another young man who had not been exposed to AMN-C227, was uncomfortable and decided to go home. JS and the remaining 3 members of the group made the choice to stay in the woods and try to determine what was triggering the unusual feeling of familiarity. As they got closer and closer to a large cave near the hiking trail, the sense of having been there before grew stronger and stronger. Armed with only one flashlight and a foolish curiosity, the 4 went inside the cave. They made their way deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness, not knowing why they felt this way or what they might find inside. None of the group could explain just what felt so familiar, only that the further they made their way into the cave, the more pronounced the feeling became. It was getting late, and they knew they should have been afraid to venture so deep into a cave with only one light source and no knowledge of what lay inside. But still, they pressed on. One of the group remarked that they should turn back, but the others refused to listen. They wanted to know what they were getting close to, what was drawing them deeper and deeper into the cave. Unfortunately for them, they would get their answer. In the heart of the cave was a pack of SCP-939, waiting patiently for their prey to wander into their domain. There are no witnesses to account for what exactly happened to JS and his companions, but we can reasonably piece the events together from what happened after. Once the friends reached the heart of the cave, the creatures were on them in seconds, raking them with their sharp claws and biting with their fangs. SCP-939 are larger and stronger than most people, so it was probably not much of a fight. However, while his friends were being devoured, JS was somehow able to scramble out of the cave and make his way into the woods in search of help. Under the influence of the AMN-C227 that had built up in the cave from the presence of the pack of SCP-939, JS lost a large portion of his memory of the event. He found himself on the side of the highway late at night, seriously injured and his clothes ripped. An officer found him there and asked him to stay still and remain calm until an ambulance could arrive. JS was still in a panic and attempted to run away from the officer, begging to be released so that he could get away. He babbled incoherently about the color red, screaming over and over again about the red, though when prompted, he could not explain what the red he was screaming about referred to. His friends were not with him. Just as the officer managed to calm JS, the ambulance arrived. Its flashing red lights sent him into another frenzy, and he attempted to escape custody, claiming that the red lights were going to get him. The official police report described JS as perhaps being under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen, that he was just having a bad trip, but the SCP Foundation knew better. The Foundation conducted an interview with JS about his experience, and determined that SCP-939 was certainly involved. As part of their cover-up effort, they strongly implicated JS in the disappearance and the death of his friends. He was convicted of manslaughter, though the bodies of his friends were never found. It is rumored that the SCP Foundation hired him on a prison work release program, and that he now works as a member of the janitorial staff at one of the Foundation's facilities. This incident led to the suspension of the use of AMN-C227, as it revealed some vital and disturbing information about the compound's side effects. After the exposure to AMN-C227, a person who found themselves exposed to it again would experience a sense of familiarity and felt compelled to investigate the source of this feeling. Essentially, anyone treated with AMN-C227 are not made aware of the existence and danger of SCP-939 would become a perfect victim, primed to be attracted to dens of SCP-939. It is likely that this side effect is not a coincidence, but rather a deliberate hunting tactic designed to attract prey that had somehow managed to escape. With no memory of their attack at the hands of SCP-939, this previous intended prey would find themselves drawn to the same den or even a new one, not knowing that they were walking back into near certain death. While the SCP Foundation suspended the use of AMNC-227 as a Class C amnestic, they did recruit a team of SCP field operatives to take advantage of this side effect. This team of operatives were deliberately administered a dose of AMNC-227 and briefed on its effects, as well as the dangers of following the feeling of déjà vu should it surface in the field. These infected officers were essentially used as bloodhounds, relying on any sense of unusual familiarity to sniff out new dens of SCP-939 so they could be captured and contained by the Foundation. As far as we know, this operation is still ongoing today. However, now that the Foundation has a sufficient number of specimens to study, additional dens of SCP-939 that are discovered are ordered to be immediately destroyed. As for the SCP-939 still in captivity, they are contained in environmentally regulated and negatively pressured cells with walls of reinforced concrete. The doors to the cells are airtight to prevent the leakage of any AMNC-227. And any personnel that interact with one of the creatures is required to wear level C hazmat gear to avoid exposure and follow decontamination procedures upon exiting the cell. All SCP-939 have subdermal tracking devices implanted to find them in the event of escape. Only one SCP-939 has given birth in the time that the creatures have been in captivity. Strangely, SCP-939 young look indistinguishable from human infants and change their physical appearance at some yet unknown point as they age. If any more offspring are produced, they will immediately be separated from the parent and studied. All that we know is that they are found in caves in the woods outside of a small town. It could be any town, even yours. So, if you're ever out hiking and struck with a sudden feeling of déjà vu, don't investigate. Don't get curious. Just go home. It might just save your life.
Why do so many of the indigenous cultures of the colder regions of North America seem to share the same legend? A legend that tells of a monster that lurks in the forests, bringing cold and death to any that meet it. This creature is an omen of famine, a territorial beast that preys on human beings. Some cultures describe it as an unholy abomination, a spirit of winter and a warning against the dangers of selfishness, one that is created whenever a person resorts to cannibalism in order to survive. It will gladly devour any man, woman, or child that wanders into its territory, holding a horrifying and insatiable hunger for human flesh. So how did so many cultures end up with the same story? Could it be because it's real? Depictions of the beast vary, but it is most commonly recognized by its tall skeletal form, like a body exhumed from the grave, even carrying the stench of death and decay with it. Anyone who encounters one risks being eaten or transformed into a creature just like it. The monster's name means an evil spirit that devours mankind, though to even say the name is taboo, as it's believed to give power to the beast. Of course, these are all just legends, right? Stories to warn against the dangers of greed and selfishness, but otherwise nothing to fear. There's no proof that such a beast could actually be roaming the frozen wastes. Many at the SCP Foundation felt the same way, until they heard about SCP-4049, the Wendigo's skull. Kept under lock and key by the Foundation with around-the-clock surveillance, SCP-4049 is an anomalous object with ties to the various Wendigo legends. As the object's moniker suggests, SCP-4049 is a skull, not a human skull, mind you. It more closely resembles a cervid skull. Cervids are a family of mammals that include most varieties of deer, elk, and other similar animals, and this particular cervid skull sports a tall pair of antlers. SCP-4049 is definitely not a fresh skull either. It shows signs of weathering and a few scars across the surface, looking as if the bone has been bleached and eroded through exposure to the elements. The skull is also missing its lower jaw, and has a sizable hole on the rear underside that may have been carved using stone tools. SCP-4049 is kept restrained inside an armored container within a concrete containment cell, and personnel are only ever allowed near it to check the restraints for signs of damage. Additionally, any Foundation staff that enter SCP-323 cell must be accompanied by an armed security officer, and in the event of a containment breach, the entire site is to be evacuated. Seems like a lot of precautions and safety measures for an old piece of bone. Surely a harmless deer skull could never be that dangerous, right? Wrong. You might be forgiven for thinking that a skull can't possibly cause harm. After all, SCP-323 is just a skull, then whatever animal it belonged to is dead. But this skull is far more than it appears to be. Through extensive testing, the SCP Foundation's researchers have learned that the skull isn't dead. No, this skull is awake and aware. It can see, hear, and has a sense of touch, and it can and will react to various stimuli. However, this does not necessarily mean that SCP-323 is alive or even sentient, but it definitely appears to have some level of sapience. It will target certain members of personnel that get too close, and has attempted multiple times to breach containment. It also reacts violently to anyone speaking English or French near it, the only two languages prohibited inside SCP-323's cell. So while the skull is not technically alive, it is definitely aware. Still, why the need for so many protocols to keep it contained? It's not as if a skull can just walk off on its own. Of course not. But SCP-323 can move, at least to a certain degree, often in a reactionary manner. SCP-323 will vibrate or move on its own, for example, turning to watch as personnel enter its containment cell. In most cases, these movements are tiny and insignificant, but other times the skull lunges, launching itself at Foundation personnel as it desperately tries to get free. Now you know why it's kept restrained. So, we have an antlered cervid skull that can move and has a low level of awareness. On their own, these would be more than enough to warrant the Foundation's interest, but the anomalous properties of SCP-323 don't stop there. The skull has an inherent ability to influence the minds of those around it. Anyone spending an hour within a 15-meter radius of SCP-323 is likely to experience the effects of this influential power. This will often result in them exhibiting uncharacteristic behaviors, thoughts, and urges, including cannibalistic tendencies and outbursts of random violence. Almost 3/4 of people that suffer the influence of SCP-323 will feel an overwhelming compulsion to take the Wendigo skull and fit their heads into the chiseled hole on the rear underside. If someone attempting this finds that their head is too big to fit inside the hollow skull, there have been cases of individuals trying to bludgeon their heads on any hard surface they can find nearby in an attempt to get their head down to a more manageable size. This will continue until one of 3 outcomes occurs. 1. The person manages to fit their head into the skull. 2. They cause themselves so much cranial damage that they are rendered unconscious. Or 3. They end up killing themselves through repeated violent head trauma. Of course, if a person actually manages to fit their head inside SCP-323, then that is a different story entirely. In these instances, the individual becomes classified as an instance of SCP-323-1. Within 10 minutes of wearing the skull, this person will suffer dramatic changes to their body. Any and all body fat will be rapidly shed as their hair also begins to fall out, leaving them looking starved and almost skeletal in appearance. Their distal phalanges, those are the bones at the tip of the fingers, will elongate and rupture the skin as they become bony, claw-like appendages. The subject will also find that their teeth have grown abnormally long and sharp, while their limbs will blacken as if they were suffering frostbite symptoms. Along with their external transformations, SCP-323-1 will also get increased strength and heightened resistance to pain. They aren't invulnerable though, and can still sustain damage and injuries. SCP-323 will also have a dramatic change happen to their metabolism, which will occur a few minutes into the physical transformation. The subject will now need an almost constant intake of calories, which if they don't receive, will cause them to starve almost instantly. With the transformation process complete, the new instance of SCP-323-1 has finally become the Wendigo,
a terrifying monster with one goal: to feed. The SCP-323 instance will seek out any human beings it can find so that it can feed upon their flesh. Those who have witnessed the 323 instance in the midst of a feeding frenzy have described the way it violently slaughtered any person it could find, leaving only a mess of blood as it devoured them, their screams mixed in with the sounds of bones crunching. In the times that the creature cannot find a human to nourish its monstrous appetite, it will try to keep itself alive any way it can. Sometimes it will slow down its movement to try and conserve energy. Other times it will ration whatever food is available to it, saving some of its last meal for a leftover snack. And on occasion, the monster will engage in auto-cannibalism, a form of cannibalism that involves eating parts of itself. Humans certainly seem to be its preferred food source though. Even when other sources of meat would be easier to acquire, SCP-323-1 will zero in on human beings and will do anything it can to make a person its next meal. When chasing down its prey, human or otherwise, SCP-323-1 has been observed uttering phrases either spoken in the primary language of whoever was transformed by the skull, or in the Severn Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Cree languages. These are all native languages of the numerous indigenous creatures that shared legends of the Wendigo. Where do the phrases come from, though? Are they another side effect of SCP-323's influence? Or do they originate from the skull itself? The Foundation's researchers are still trying to figure that out, and at the moment, they have no clues as to where they come from. In one containment breach in 2006, during which an instance of SCP-323-1 was able to kill and devour 12 members of Foundation personnel, on-site surveillance recorded audio of the creature speaking. It rasped, while dragging a body behind it. After this, the sound of a wet cracking noise was recorded, possibly one of the victim's bones being broken by SCP-323-1 so it could get to the marrow inside. The 323-1 instance does at times seem to try and resist the influence of the Wendigo skull. Additional recordings capture the creature saying, the creature then said, followed by noises of it eating the body. It seems that even the Wendigo has its own internal struggles, perhaps showing that there is still something left of the human who put on the skull, and that deep down they are fighting against their cannibalistic impulses. But where exactly did the Foundation find SCP-323? And is it really the skull of an actual Wendigo, the famous creature from North American legend? In 1997, the SCP Foundation sent a detachment to Bitterron Lake in Saskatchewan, Canada. There had been reports of a local community murdering individuals and leaving their bodies in the forest to appease a dangerous creature residing nearby. This creature, as it was later discovered, was an instance of SCP-323-1. Someone had found the skull and succumbed to its influence, placing it on their head and turning into a monster. Ever since, the locals had been killing people and offering up their dead bodies as sustenance, fearful of what would happen if they didn't, after being brought up with legends of the Wendigo. SCP Foundation agents were able to capture the beast, however it died of starvation while being transported back to containment. They also covered up the recent deaths in the area by giving the local residents amnestics, and creating a cover story about an unidentified serial killer. Prior to this, James Namagoose, a local man who was involved in the murders, was brought in for questioning. He remained oddly calm when interviewed, but admitted he had helped move the bodies that were being offered up as food for SCP-323-1, or as he called it, the Wendigo. According to James, a local story among the Cree people told of men who had once tried to control a Wendigo, and perhaps even tame it through offerings of food. Whether or not James and his fellow locals had the same intention, their primary concern was keeping themselves safe. He described first encountering the creature, a warped man walking out of the woods. Killed our friends right in front of us. Sometimes it would stare more than it would make to kill. Try to talk to you. It whispered at me, "Permiso, come and eat." It made me cold in my bones. As the interview continued, James claimed that he felt like he understood this warped man. He described feeling like the Wendigo was encouraging him to kill, that the creature would help him pass when his own time came. James told the Foundation doctor questioning him that he had heard the creature in his mind, and he felt it watching him almost constantly. Mr. Namagu stated that he hoped in killing people as offerings to the Wendigo, that his own family would be spared. Like the other locals, James Namagoose was given amnestics to forget all about the creature and the murders he'd played a part in committing. So far, none of the Foundation's staff have experienced any similar behavioral effects to those James described. Those who work closely with SCP-323 or have witnessed an instance of SCP-323-1 have felt the creature communicating with them, or urging them to kill on its behalf. Ultimately, who is to say if SCP-323 is the skull of a Wendigo like those from Legends? It certainly seems like it is, but with no way to tell exactly how old the skull is. Perhaps it's actually the reverse, and it was the Wendigo legend that spawned from instances of SCP-323-1 that were first encountered by indigenous North American cultures hundreds of years ago. One thing is for certain. If you ever come across a skull with tall antlers, you should try to resist putting it on. Otherwise, you might not be feeling like yourself for much longer. Who doesn't love dogs? They're friendly, energetic, and can be beneficial to their owner's happiness and mental health. On top of all those positive qualities, most dogs are fiercely loyal to their masters. You'll often hear stories of dogs defending their owners or even staying by their side through their very last days, and even sticking next to them beyond death. As sad as that thought might be to many dog owners, it provides us the perfect context for today's topic. It's about time you met SCP-1111, sometimes also known by the nickname the White Dog. This moniker actually refers to one of the two halves of SCP-1111, namely the former, SCP-1111-1, while its counterpart is simply known only as SCP-1111-2. As you may have already deduced, SCP-1111-1 is, or at least appears to be, a fairly common domesticated dog. Sporting white fur that gives it its nickname, the White Dog is a cross between two different popular breeds, the German Shepherd and the Labrador Retriever. However, upon closer inspection, this particular pup is a far cry from one you might see fetching sticks or chasing squirrels at the park. For one, this dog never eats or drinks. Under normal circumstances, that would be worrying behavior in any dog, but in SCP-1111-1's case, it comes second to the fact that this dog is partially see-through. Now that's definitely not normal. In actual fact, this pooch is pretty far from ordinary. It seems to be at least semi-translucent, not quite as much as we usually picture a ghost or hologram, but also not fully visible like a living being. In fact, how clearly visible the White Dog is can vary depending on how close it is to 1111-2. Any further than 500 meters away and the dog will gradually grow more and more transparent, but not fully invisible. But visibility isn't the only thing that shifts with 1111-1's distance from its other half. The size of the dog also changes. It remains standing at 150 centimeters when directly beneath 1111-2. and gradually gets smaller the further and further away from 1111-2 it gets. Finally, there's its eyes. SCP-1111-1 possesses a distinct pair of glowing red eyes, the brightness and intensity of which increase the closer it is to 1111-2. So let's recap. So far, we have a strange white dog with glowing eyes that changes size and becomes more or less visible the further it gets from a secondary element. But if the white dog is SCP-1111-1, then what forms this second part of SCP-1111? Well, if you were to look close enough at the white dog, you'd notice the red collar that it wears around its neck. And hanging from that collar is a tag, on which is printed one single word: loyal. It's certainly a fitting word to describe 1111-1. Why? Because SCP-1111-2 is presumably the dog's master, or rather, its master's dead body. Dressed in an old, worn business suit and formal dress shoes, SCP-1111-2 appears to be a deceased male of indeterminate age. The precise identity of this man has proven next to impossible for Foundation researchers to determine. The condition of his suit and shoes have deteriorated so much that it has been difficult to even identify the original company that produced the clothing worn by the corpse. As for his cause of death, well, that unfortunately seems all too obvious, given that the 1111-2 body always appears the same way, hanging from a tree with a noose around his neck. Foundation staff observed the two parts that make up SCP-1111 have noted that 1111-2 will occasionally make quick, violent twitching movements. These random jerks and spasms of the corpse are consistent with those exhibited by a person who is dying from asphyxiation, and often researchers have heard the body making desperate gasps for air. The closer his white furried canine counterpart is, the more frequent and violent these motions and sounds will become. It's almost as if SCP-1111-2 has somehow been trapped on the very brink of death, reliving those final moments over and over again, all while guarded by his loyal white dog. If left alone and not interfered with, the white dog will lie down just beneath where its master's body is hanging. The dog never sleeps, nor does it require any food or water, and does not even seem to breathe. And as long as Foundation research staff keep their distance, both parts of SCP-1111 seem content to remain in a docile state. To keep them contained, the SCP Foundation has established a 2-kilometer safe zone around SCP-1111, keeping them monitored through cameras attached to weather balloons. The restricted enclosure is, according to a public cover story, a weather monitoring station, hence the balloons. No member of Foundation staff is permitted anywhere within a kilometer of SCP-1111, unless they are given express permission from a superior member of the Foundation. Should SCP-1111-1 ever stray away from the tree where its master hangs though, then the area must be evacuated of all personnel until the dog returns to its normal position. However, Foundation staff are urged to be wary when approaching SCP-1111, because the white dog may well be more ferociously loyal than any pet. Emphasis on ferocious. The moment that 1111-1 becomes aware of anything coming towards itself and its owner's body, the dog will become viciously hostile. Regardless of the person or object coming towards it, the semi-corporeal canine will attempt to attack and destroy the intruder. In this state, the white dog exhibits even more dramatic physiological differences from a normal domesticated dog. Video footage recorded by the SCP Foundation shows that the dog is capable of reaching incredible speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, which is, of course, considerably faster than an average canine. The white dog can also reach a height of 6 meters when jumping up into the air, and has teeth and a bite strength powerful enough to tear through armor plating composed of 15mm thick titanium. Given the entity's speed, aggression, and translucent qualities, any attempts by the SCP Foundation to neutralize the white dog or even capture it for closer examination have ended the same grisly way for the staff members who tried. The creature's fierce loyalty defending its owner's body also make it incredibly difficult for Foundation staff to even get close enough to SCP-1111-2 to properly study the remains. As we said before, that loyal tag around the dog's neck is certainly an accurate description. On a date which has been redacted from its file, an incident occurred involving SCP-1111 and a team that consisted of a number of Foundation agents. This team had been ordered to neutralize the white dog and transport the anomalous animal to a containment facility. Attempting to evade the creature's direct line of sight, the agents approached the hanging body of SCP-1111-2 from the north, the opposite direction to the way the dog was facing. Possessing a sense of hearing and smell far beyond that of a human being, the white dog was able to quickly detect the agents approaching its master. When the team got within 300 meters of the tree where the body was hanging, the canine set upon them, tearing at clothing and shredding protective armor with its teeth in order to get to the agent's soft flesh underneath. One of these agents fled, running as fast as they could from the area. But of course, this was a futile move. as the white dog quickly noticed and began to pursue the Foundation agent with its superpowered speed. As it chased them, the surveillance cameras recorded SCP-1111-1 decreasing in size, becoming harder to see with the naked eye the further it ran from the tree. The dog's speed began to decline too. The further the dog got from the tree with the noose, the less the body hanging from it seemed to be spasming too. When the white dog had reached 900 meters from SCP-1111-2, the corpse was seen to stop moving entirely, frozen and stiff as one would normally expect a deceased body to be. Realizing how far away it was from its master, SCP-1111-1 froze. Appearing unsure for a moment, it turned to look towards the body of its master, perhaps sensing that the random jerks and post-mortem movements had stopped. At this point, the dog howled and sprinted back towards the tree, causing the corpse of its owner to begin twitching yet again. Footage of this incident showed that the white dog was impervious to conventional weapons, and any rounds fired at the canine by Foundation agents merely passed through its ghostly body. However, its claws and teeth were very much solid, and it was able to slaughter almost all the agents, save for the one who fled, who ended up being the sole survivor of the encounter. Following this disastrous mission, the O5 Council issued an order that, in order to protect the lives of Foundation personnel, only remote-controlled drones and expendable D-Class personnel would be permitted anywhere near SCP-1111. Shortly after the previous incident, a group of D-Class were sent into the area around the tree where SCP-1111-2 was hanging, this time approaching from multiple directions at once. But this only led to the same results, as the white dog began to quickly move between each of the D-Classes, killing them one after another. Only one, D-83011, was able to make it close enough to the corpse to make any noteworthy observations. As they approached, the hanging corpse of SCP-1111-2 seemed to slow its jerks and twitches, and the body did something that had never been seen before. It opened its eyes. It raised its arms towards the approaching D-Class in what looked like a welcoming hug, only for D-83011 to be torn to shreds by the white dog moments after. Cameras nearby picked up more previously unseen movement, namely the owner's mouth moving almost as if he was saying the words, "No, down boy." But soon after, the corpse fell limp again and resumed its normal twitches. Following this, the Foundation have theorized that the white dog could possibly be contained by somehow removing its master's body from the area. Some staff have also noted that SCP-1111 shares certain traits with SCP-023, a similar anomalous creature also referred to as the Black Shuck. Much like the white dog, the Shuck also possesses a ghostly canine form, and appears to be the same large dog-like creature that is referenced in ancient folklore from throughout the British Isles. According to legend, the Shuck appears to travelers at crossroads, serving as an omen of bad luck, impending disaster, and is even thought to be one of the Hounds of Hell itself. SCP-023, like SCP-1111, also has anomalous abilities that focus on geographic space. In the Black Shuck's case, anyone it detects approaching it will die or lose a member of their family within a year. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 could be related, or even instances of the same phenomenon, a sort of dog yin and yang. But since they have still, as of yet, been unable to capture the white dog, it has been impossible to verify this. The SCP Foundation will no doubt keep trying though. While testing may have been suspended for the time being, they always know where to find SCP-1111-1, beneath its master's hanging body, guarding it for all eternity.
It skitters in the dark, its insect-like legs tapping across the marble floors as terrified Foundation researchers flee. They hear its voice, the deep, silky tones of an elderly British man, spouting nonsense like, "The nightmare is a dream to the nameless slug that wanders across minefield in the remains of deer and kings." While the scientists run, the creature gains on them. It's fast, impossibly fast. While they still try to escape down this darkened hallway, ear-splitting containment breach sirens blast through the air. They may try to escape, but it's futile. In a sense, they're already dead. All they are now is prey for the Heart of Darkness. When someone says the word heart, there are a lot of images that come to mind. You might think of Valentine's Day, heart-shaped cards and candies. You might think of heartbreak, rejection, loss. You might simply think of a heart in the anatomical sense, the vital organ that pumps blood through our bodies. It's unlikely, though, that you would associate the word heart with terror, destruction, and countless deaths. However, employees of the SCP Foundation might think differently, especially if they've ever had a run-in with SCP-058. Much of the information about 058's discovery is highly classified, but the few details that are known paint a chilling picture. At an SCP Foundation test site, the day was proceeding as usual, with scientists and security personnel going about their regular daily tasks. There was no hint of danger in the air, beyond the base level that always comes with setting foot in an SCP Foundation site, at least. Several researchers were performing an experiment, the specifics of which have been expunged from all records, involving the carcass of a cow. When a researcher, Dr. C, placed his hands on the specimen and prepared to dissect it, he was shocked to feel a pulse coming from the supposedly dead animal. Dr. C shared his surprise with his colleagues, but his concerns were dismissed immediately. Clearly this was a corpse. He was imagining things, they said. After all, he was relatively new to the job. It was probably just nerves. The head researcher, Dr. L, insisted that he take over. Pushing Dr. C to the side, Dr. L began to make an incision into the animal's chest. As he did, he too felt something peculiar. There was no doubt about it. This dead cow had a beating heart. He looked up from his work to tell the other researchers to explain what he felt, but by then, it was too late. Something horrible was already happening. With a stomach-churning sound of squishing flesh, the cow's heart burst from its chest and flopped onto the floor. It was terrifyingly large, and all the doctors jumped back from the sight of it. 4 spindly, spider-like legs poked through the flesh of the heart, and it began to quickly skitter about the room. Researchers reviewing the security footage would later note that it didn't just move randomly. It seemed agitated, angry at being discovered, and it displayed immediate hostility towards the scientists in the room. 4 tentacles next unfurled from within the heart and stretched out into full, writhing appendages. They moved frighteningly fast as the heart whipped around the room and were coated in sharp spines. Finally, a stinger poked out from the back of the heart, where the whole of the superior vena cava should be. All of the scientists leapt into action, with one reaching for a scalpel and another moving towards the door. But before the men could so much as call for help, the tentacles wrapped around them and ripped them to shreds. Hearing screams coming from the laboratory, security personnel arrived to contain the threat. However, they were no match for the strange creature that would soon be known as SCP-058. It tore through the security team in minutes, leaving their tattered remains in its wake. Much to the horror of the surviving personnel at the site, SCP-058 was able to escape containment and make its way to a neighboring town. Reports of the incident said that, when the creature reached the town, you could hear the screaming for miles. SCP-058 carved a path of violence through the town, attacking everything in sight with its stinger and tentacles, and leaving a trail of strange fluid from its stinger. Dozens of citizens were killed, and 70% of the buildings were completely destroyed. When agents were dispatched to the location to retrieve the creature, they were shocked to see the level of destruction caused by something so small. The scent of blood and smoke filled the air, and severed limbs littered the ground alongside splintered wood and collapsed brick. The survivors removed from the wreckage were inconsolable, only calming down once they were given an amnestic to erase their memory of the encounter with SCP-058. They had to be given new lives as well, as there was nothing left of their old ones. SCP Foundation agents were only able to capture and contain SCP-058 after it was crushed by pieces of a building that collapsed on top of it. They found it flattened under a slab of stone, legs flailing uselessly, tentacles limp. The agents were able to safely remove the debris and bring in the heart without any more casualties that day. Once it was brought into captivity, the heart was contained for 3 weeks and remained largely quiet during that time. It was almost inconceivable that this small creature hadn't been killed in the incident, but the Foundation would soon learn that this creature was freakishly durable. It escaped once more while being transferred to an SCP containment site, again causing injuries and death. Having only experienced SCP-058 in its docile, injured form,
The team responsible for the transfer was unprepared for the sheer power and violence the creature was capable of. It was able to escape an armored car and make its way into a forest, where it eviscerated several squirrels and rabbits. Or rather, they were believed to be squirrels and rabbits. The remains were too mutilated to properly identify. It was only finally apprehended after being crushed by an armored tank. But even this didn't kill the creature, and it was transferred to Armed Biocontainment Area 14, where it remains to this day. There is a great deal about SCP-058 that is horrifying, but there is one attribute it has shown in captivity that would make even the most seasoned researcher's skin crawl. Though it has no anatomical capacity for speech, no throat, vocal cords, or even a respiratory system, SCP-058 speaks. Not only does it speak, but it speaks constantly, in the deep voice of an elderly British man. No one knows who the voice might belong to, or if it belongs to anyone at all. Perhaps it belongs only to SCP-058 somehow. As is often the case with SCPs that are capable of speech, there have been multiple attempts to interview the creature, and each time, it ended in complete disaster. The only interview with an available transcript, Interview 05804, was conducted by Dr. Johnston with several personnel in the room for additional security. Dr. Johnston attempted to get at the origins of the creature, asking for its name and where it was from. The creature responded in cryptic, unsettling poetry, giving answers to simple questions with, "I had dreams of the Queen, wonders that lived inside the hearts of love, and silent treatments for all the elderly that I knew were once whole." After the fourth recitation of a similar verse from the heart, Personnel D-067 made a comment on the creepy nature of its responses, almost as if it was offended by the remark. SCP-058 immediately stretched a tentacle across the room, wrapped it around D-067, and lifted him into the air. He began screaming and clawing at the tentacle in an attempt to free himself as his fellow personnel tried to help him. They grabbed at the tentacle, but found their hands pierced and bloodied by the spikes that cover it. Dr. Johnston commanded 058 to let him go, but it did not oblige. Instead, the man was crushed to death by the tentacle, and his limp body left to drop to the floor. The interview concluded with a single statement from the nightmarish heart. "The sensual violence of lust is all the assurance you will ever need to know the worth of life." SCP-058 never seems to say anything that has to do with the people or events around it. It speaks in the same haunting, poetic language even when it's attacking or killing something. No matter what happens to it, what is done to it, or what anyone says, SCP-058 keeps talking, and its tone of voice with the pace of speech never changing, and further attempts to interview it have been abandoned due to the safety risk involved. So what happened to the creature often called the Heart of Darkness? Where is it now? SCP-058 is kept in an isolated containment chamber made of reinforced heat-resistant steel with a backing of reinforced concrete. In order to placate its bloodthirsty, carnivorous tendencies, the creature is given a live cow every 3 days. It is uncertain how exactly SCP-058 eats, given that it does not have a mouth or stomach, but every time it is finished with a cow, only bones remain. Routine maintenance is conducted on a tight schedule, and the heart is never allowed out of its containment area under any circumstances. After 2 previous escapes from containment, the Foundation is not taking any chances. Its constant speech is recorded via audio devices that are running at all times. Out of concern for their safety and mental health, no personnel are permitted to listen to recordings of SCP-058 speaking for more than 30 minutes at a time. It is unknown what will happen to someone who listens for longer, but it has been suggested that the consequences could be dire. If the creature ever escapes again, the containment site is ordered to be destroyed via the detonation of an on-site nuclear weapon. Under no circumstances can it be allowed to make its way out into the world again. Even with all these precautions in place, SCP-058 has been responsible for over 150 deaths at its current containment site. There are some at the Foundation who have campaigned for SCP-058 to be terminated, believing that there is more harm than good done by keeping it alive. However, all attempts to terminate it have so far failed. No matter how much physical trauma the heart suffers, it does not seem to be able to be killed. It can only be incapacitated for a short time. There is a classic horror story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Telltale Heart. In it, a man murders an old man and buries his body beneath the floorboards of his home. There, even though the old man is certainly dead, the murderer swears he can hear the beating of the heart coming up through the floorboards. No matter what he does to quiet the sound, he cannot escape it, and is eventually driven mad by the incessant beating of the dead man's heart. SCP-058 may not be a man's heart, a human heart, or even a real heart at all. However, just like the Telltale Heart, it continues to impossibly beat no matter how hard anyone tries to stop it. The steady thump of its pulse haunts the SCP Foundation, a grim reminder that there is something within its walls that can, and will, kill everyone it can if given the chance. It couldn't be destroyed by collapsed buildings, an armored tank, or an army of experts, and the contingency plan of a nuclear blast is not even guaranteed to work. It is entirely possible that, once the facility has been laid waste and all the staff have been incinerated, and the smoke has finally cleared, the Heart of Darkness will still be there, still beating, still talking, and still killing. There's a monster under my bed. Almost every parent has heard their kids make the claim, and it's usually nothing more than some unusual shadows, or at worst a household pest scurrying around. Parents usually tell their child to go back to sleep, or maybe try to dispel their fears by shining a light under the bed. It's a childhood rite of passage, and one that usually passes soon enough. But for one young woman in Missouri, the monster under her bed was very real and very dangerous. SCP-3887-A doesn't seem like she belongs in a containment facility. She's a 24-year-old woman who lived a quiet life in her hometown until things went horribly wrong. She doesn't appear to possess any special abilities, and the Foundation is able to contain her without any difficulty. But wherever she goes, death and destruction follow. It's not her doing, but there is something out there that will not stand to see her hurt in any way. Her personal monster under the bed is very protective, something another young woman found out the hard way. Incident 3887-A-1 occurred in 2014, when the young woman was attending a party with her girlfriend. Her partner was berating and humiliating her in front of the guests, which was apparently not a rare occurrence in their relationship. Suddenly, something manifested under a nearby table, and before she could react, her girlfriend was brutally mauled by the unknown creature. Her limbs were completely severed from her body and she died at the scene. An undercover SCP agent who was implanted within the local authorities made their way to the scene as soon as possible and found SCP-3887-A in a state of shock. And who could blame her? After the encounter she just had with what would become to be known as SCP-3887-B. While 3887-A is a normal human with no unusual abilities or characteristics, 3887-B is anything but. Foundation scientists have described it as a humanoid entity standing over 7 feet tall. Its skin is greenish-gray, and it has 2 long, sharp horns on its head. Its head and neck are covered in thick black hair, and its eyes are a striking yellow color. Its mouth is full of sharp fangs similar to that of a shark, and its elongated arms allow it to move on all 4s. It has a long, hairless tail that resembles a rat's, and possesses both male and female reproductive organs. No one knows where it came from, but they do have an idea why it's sticking around. SCP-3887-B seems to be bonded to SCP-3887-A, and can appear in any darkened area within a 5-meter radius around her. While its favorite location is under 3887-A's bed, which has since been brought to the facility, it appears to be able to teleport wherever she is, just as it did during the party where it made its presence brutally clear. It has odd eating patterns and is able to gain nourishment from practically any object, whether it resembles what we would consider food or not. Its favorite treats, for example, SCP-3887-A's socks, but it does have one weakness that has been useful in containing it. it can't stand the light. And it doesn't just hate it. When SCP-3887-B is exposed to bright light, it develops blisters and wounds and flees to the nearest dark area. SCP Foundation scientists are at a loss to explain exactly what this creature is, though. And SCP-3887-B seems to be a chimera of multiple animals with multiple types of DNA. It possesses DNA similar to humans, but also from a type of oryx with similar horns, as well as a rat with the same type of tail, as well as a common cane toad. And there's even some DNA that doesn't resemble any creature in nature. Studying it further has been trickier though, because it seems to have the effect of disrupting any electronic recording devices near it, causing lasting damage if it's in proximity to them for too long. There has been one good bit of news for SCP scientists though, because while it has shown that it can be extremely violent, it has not attacked Foundation officials, not yet at least. Its good behavior may not have anything to do with how it personally feels about Foundation staff though, and is instead all thanks to SCP-3887-A. 3887-A has been completely cooperative since she was taken into custody by the Foundation. She doesn't perceive them as a threat, and so far it seems like SCP-3887-B is following her lead. It has a strong emotional connection to the young woman, and when they're alone, they show affectionate behavior towards each other. While the creature does not seem to like the Foundation, it doesn't seem like it wants to become hostile, until the Foundation gives it a reason to. When 3887-A was interviewed following the tragic incident by undercover Foundation agent Bellamy, she was panicked and terrified. She admitted that her partner often treated her badly and believed that the creature was trying to protect her. She admitted that she had seen the creature before. She even had a name for it. She called her Grenda. 3887-A thought she was crazy. Now there was proof though. She was not imagining the monster under her bed. Describing Grenda as her boogeyman, the young woman talked about how she had known the creature since she was a child. She grew up in an old house in the country that was full of strange sounds that made it sound like something was in her room with her. And sometimes she would even catch a glimpse of what she thought was a monster under her bed watching her. She tried telling her parents, but they thought she was making the whole thing up. And even she was forced to wonder if she was hallucinating or had somehow imagined the whole thing. But then when she was a teenager, all of her doubts were put to bed. One night, 3887-A's parents were loudly fighting, a sadly not rare occurrence in their household, and she locked herself in her room to get away from them. As she hid, Grenda emerged from under her bed for the first time and talked with her. And she isn't the only one that Grenda is willing to speak with. She's also sat down for her own interviews with Foundation researchers. Well, the researchers sat down, while Grenda remained under the bed. Foundation researcher Dr. Tanner interviewed Grenda, who was cordial but guarded, and remained deeply protective of the girl under her protection. She expressed feeling guilty for getting 3887-A in trouble, but Dr. Tanner assured her that 3887-A was not being punished and was being kept at the Foundation for her own safety. He offered that they could keep Grenda safe as well, but she responded that as long as 3887-A remained safe, then she would be as well. She explained that her kind fed on the anxiety of children, which was why they lurked under their beds. She was apparently only supposed to remain with this girl until she was 10 or so, but became attached and decided to stay with her, which was against the rules of her people, and as a result she had been exiled from her home. At this point, Grenda offered to show herself to the researcher and began to emerge from under the bed. Unfortunately, as has become standard when attempting to document SCP-3887-B, all of the recording equipment malfunctioned and was unable to record Grenda's appearance. The Foundation continued to have questions about this pair and their strange relationship, and interviewed SCP-3887-A again, this time by a Dr. Garden. 3887-A told Dr. Garden that she had been sleeping well and had been spending lots of time talking to the entity under her bed. That led Dr. Garden to bring up a theory about how SCP-3887-B had come to exist. The young woman speculated that Grenda may have been created from her fears. One of her first memories of being scared was when she went to an aquarium and a massive bull shark came close to the glass where it bared its rows and rows of shark teeth, the exact same kind of teeth that Grenda possessed. In fact, all of the traits Grenda exhibited, like her rat tail, seemed to connect to childhood fears that she had experienced. 3887-A always felt alone as a little girl, and she believed that she might have manifested Grenda as a companion who was there exactly when she needed her to be. This raised the question of whether SCP-3887-B really was the unnatural entity, or if SCP-3887-A is the source of the entity's existence. The next interview with SCP-3887-B would raise even more questions. When Dr. Garden went to interview SCP-3887-B, it was clear that the entity was agitated. Grenda became hostile as soon as Dr. Garden entered the room, saying she was hungry and didn't want to answer questions. When Dr. Garden said that 3887-A had provided it with socks, the entity reacted with anger. The socks were just a snack. To live, it needed fear. 3887-B fed off human emotions, specifically paranoia and anxiety. SCP-3887-A used to be full of them, but now she was unusually calm in the facility, and it was having a bad effect on her companion. When Dr. Garden promised to talk to supervisors, the creature became more agitated and reached out from under the bed, grabbing Dr. Garden and pulling her under the bed. No one knew what would happen to Dr. Garden under the bed, and SCP-3887-A was quickly summoned to try to calm her companion down. But when she called for Grenda, there was no response. It was feared that Dr. Garden had been lost to the area under the bed that no one can access. But then 13 minutes later, the doctor suddenly emerged from under the bed. She was bruised, soaking wet, and missing articles including shoes, socks, and her glasses. Later interviews with Dr. Garden would give the best picture yet of where SCP-3887-B comes from. Dr. Garden described being pulled under the bed, which then led somewhere else entirely. She fell for 15 seconds, still being held by SCP-3887-B. But when she landed, she was alone in a large cave made of black rock with purple gems in the walls. The cave contained a waterfall, a lake, and what looked like SCP-3887's secret home. It was filled with pictures of the girl she was bonded to, a violin, some stuffed animals, and large piles of the girl's socks. SCP-3887-B was there in the cave with her too, watching her. She would catch glimpses of the creature, her white fangs and her yellow eyes. She was terrified and ran screaming, trying to find any way out of there as the creature pursued her. She couldn't evade her forever though, and eventually Grenda grabbed Dr. Garden. She was lifted into the air as Grenda bared her shark-like teeth, but instead of eating her, the creature instead took off the doctor's socks and thanked her, before somehow sending her back up into the darkness. She then found herself back under the bed, surrounded by worried SCP personnel. Since then, SCP-3887-B has not brought anyone else into its home. It seems feeding on Dr. Garden's fear was enough for the time being, and the situation has remained stable since. The SCP Foundation has been able to develop relatively simple containment procedures for the two entities that make up SCP-3887, as neither is currently hostile. The two are contained within a standard humanoid containment cell with the bed at the center. SCP-3887-A is given standard amenities, a healthy diet including a vitamin for some minor health issues, and her own control over the lights in the cell. She has requested and been given a gaming system for entertainment and up-to-date entertainment media, but was denied access to the internet, a pet cat, and access to the on-site recreation areas, due to the risk of SCP-3887-B getting loose. The facility does have plans in place in case Grenda decides to become hostile again though. While SCP-3887-A normally maintains control of the lights in her cell, the Foundation has a failsafe installed so they can turn them up at any time. Since SCP-3887-B reacts negatively to bright light, The lights can be used as a security system to send her retreating back under the bed until she can be pacified through other measures. While neither of the SCP-3887 entities appears to be seeking to escape, it is impossible to predict where and how 3887-B would act if 3887-A was free from her cell again, and whether she would attempt to harm those she perceives as a threat to 3887-A as she did in the past. So for now, the Foundation is focused on keeping both of them pacified, which in the case of 3887-B means a healthy supply of socks. But there's one other lingering question the Foundation hasn't solved. SCP-3887-B referenced being exiled from its kin for breaking the rules and was confined to a cave. That means there might be others like Grenda out there, and they may be more aggressive and less scrupulous than she is. While no other specimens have been found, the SCP Foundation will be keeping a careful eye on any reports of monsters lurking under children's beds. They might just be telling the truth.
Dr. Reynard had lost everything. His job, the respect of his peers, and if everyone else was right, perhaps even his mind. It was 11 p.m. when he staggered to the edge of Okanagan Lake in British Columbia, eyes and judgment clouded with booze. This lake could have been what made his career as a researcher for the SCP Foundation, but now that bright future was slipping through his fingers, like the dry silt beneath his feet. He looked hatefully across the endless dark surface of the water and loudly cursed. Stupid, empty place. Just hours ago, he'd been stripped of his ranks and released from his position at the Foundation for wasting the organization's time and resources on frivolous personal projects. Frivolous, he thought. What a terrible joke. Just because the higher-ups refused to acknowledge what was going out here didn't mean it wasn't there. Moonlight shimmered off the water's surface. Wait. Was that moonlight? Or was there something lurking underneath the water? To truly answer this question, if any answer is possible at all, we need to go back to the beginning and ask ourselves a different question. How does the SCP Foundation actually find most of the anomalies it catalogs and contains? It is a simple question with a multifaceted answer, depending on the anomaly in question. For the most part, the Foundation has a network of field agents embedded in pretty much every institution across the globe, including rival groups of interest like the Global Occult Coalition and the Serpent's Hand. If they so much as sniff the strange and unusual, they alert the nearest site director and the necessary personnel are dispatched to the scene. There's also the Foundation web crawlers, which are a form of specialized software constantly patrolling the web for anomalous activity that the Foundation wants to know about. And one of the rarer but still incredibly important methods of finding SCPs involve looking into myths and local legends. Sure, it may seem like a good way to waste time and resources, but the crossover between recorded SCPs and folklore is surprisingly common. Take SCP-1000, the formerly hyper-intelligent apes that were nearly the dominant species on Earth until humans and a certain capricious forest god pulled the dirty trick on them. They're better known to most civilians as the legendary Bigfoot or Sasquatch, perhaps the most famous cryptid of all time, or SCP-1337 the Hitchhiker, an anomalous spectral entity that manifests in the cars of those who don't pick her up, and performs horrific acts of violence against them. She's eerily similar to legends you can find not only all over the US, but the entire world, of ghostly hitchhikers intruding into the cars of unwary travelers, and scaring them half to death. Or worse, if you're unlucky. Another case where myths and legends pointed the SCP Foundation in exactly the right direction. And of course, there's SCP-136, the terrifying naked doll. This was an almost featureless children's doll found inside an abandoned house, but prolonged time in its presence can make you the victim of a warped apparition that'll drive you half mad with fear. It's got such a detrimental psychological effect on people that the Foundation has been controversially using it as a torture method during enhanced interrogation sessions with captured members of rival groups of interest. And how did they find it? The Foundation keeps track of neighborhood rumors about haunted houses with supposedly supernatural inhabitants. Clearly, when it looks like it might actually get results, no myth or local legend is too big or too small to warrant an investigation from the SCP Foundation. It was with this mindset that a younger, happier, and less drunk Dr. B. Renard set off with his team to Okanagan Lake in search of what locals had referred to as the legendary Ogopogo. We've all heard of the Loch Ness Monster, the lake monster from Scotland that's been turning heads for the better part of a century, and may be related to two other similar SCPs, namely SCP-3934 and SCP-5533. But Ogopogo is Canada's answer to good old Nessie. While the Loch Ness Monster resembles a plesiosaur, the Ogopogo is much more serpentine, with a long, coiling body covered in green scales. Its long tail is said to be able to create fierce storms along the surface of the water with its vicious whips, killing scores of unfortunate adventurers who dared stray too close. The name Ogopogo is also a palindrome, meaning it reads the same forwards as it does backwards, and is believed to have originated in the novelty song from the year 1924. However, it's likely that the actual beast this somewhat goofy name was given to is a much older, fiercer entity. And for the sake of his reputation as a researcher, as he took a plane to the Okanagan Valley, Dr. Renard very much hoped this was the case. Of course, he'd explored the legends heavily, so much so that he was sure there had to be something to this whole thing. The Shwepmek and Silix peoples, the lake-dwelling monster was known as Naitaka, which has been loosely translated into the sacred creature of the water god, and most menacing of all, the water demon. The beast was often described in oral traditions as being a malicious supernatural entity with great power and ill intent towards those trespassing on its territory. Legend has it that anyone who crosses Okanagan Lake, the supposed domain of the Ogopogo, needs to make a sacrifice to the monster in order to ensure safe passage. Those who refused to give this sacrifice the beast demanded would pay a heavy toll, being devoured or dragged down to a watery grave, never to be seen again. And this monster isn't just some old folktale either. Contemporary sightings have dated back to 1873, with both settlers and First Nations people alike spotting the sinister Ogopogo in the intervening years. Dr. Renard had pored through the files on hundreds of sightings. There were a number of incidents in the 1980s, so much so that the environmentalist group Greenpeace moved to have the creature classified as a protected species. Naturally, official sources decided against the idea, claiming that none of the sightings were of substance. In 1992, a vast shape filmed under the murky water in Okanagan Lake was suggested to be the legendary beast. However, the FBI stepped in to deny the validity of this case, stating that the beast was much more likely to be debris falling off a local tree, disappointing lovers of the strange and unusual everywhere. In 2011, nearly 20 years later, there was more video footage of a sighting, showing large, dark shapes moving underneath the surface of the Okanagan Lake. However, this claim was once again dismissed by all outside parties, claiming the shape of the beast underneath the water was more likely to be a pair of logs. Bummer. 2018 was an exciting year for the Ogopogo, with 3 different sightings of the creature being reported at different times throughout the year. Witnesses described the creature as being a giant snake, around 50 feet long, which is consistent with a lot of the historical descriptions of the beast, as well as being over twice as long as the reticulated python, the non-anomalous longest snake in the world. So naturally, authority figures once again shot down the validity of any claims that the creature was actually real and out there. Dr. Renard found this almost funny. They didn't even need to suppress knowledge of this creature. If it really was out there, mainstream sources seemed to be doing their job for them and keeping the creature covered up. He was determined, though, that he would be the one to prove to his superiors that this creature was indeed real and lurking in Okanagan Lake. He organized a number of varied investigative missions, from actively trawling the lake itself to conducting interviews with first-hand witnesses as well as those who claimed to see no merit in their evidence and testimony. Dr. Renard noticed a strange phenomenon. The people who'd seen it firsthand were as certain that it was real as the doubters were that it was fake. Even for typical skeptics, the non-believers seemed shockingly resolute that there was really nothing down there, and the alleged photos and videos were 100% bogus. Early diagnostic tests into the lake, directly overseen by Dr. Renard, seemed to point to a creature clearly being down there. He found the direct testimony both compelling and consistent with what he and his team were catching glimpses of. So why were people so adamant that nothing was down there? It was almost like the Ogopogo really was as mythical as the First Nations legends said. and it was casting a spell on all the non-believers. That's when it hit Dr. Renard like a perfect bolt of lightning. They weren't just looking at a particularly large sea snake with unnatural longevity here. They were looking at a sea serpent with cognito-hazardous powers. It was a beast with a perfect defense mechanism. Only those who saw it up close would actually believe that the creature was real. Anyone who found out about it via secondary sources would experience an extreme state of incredulity. Nobody except those who saw it directly would ever believe that it existed, and thus even the most intelligent prey would lower their defenses around its domain. An elegant and dangerous anomalous hunter, Dr. Renard had found himself a worthy opponent, and one that would help him make his mark at the Foundation. He drew up the file and gave it the designation SCP-1933 before sending it back to his supervisors. They wrote back, saying that they didn't feel as though there was enough of a basis and evidence to deem this entry worthy of inclusion. If Dr. Renard wanted to have his so-called Ogopogo dignified with entry into the SCP Foundation archives, he needed to back it up properly. This presented a problem to Dr. Renard. How could he provide documentation and evidence for a creature that had the defining anomalous power of making all of its own documentation and evidence seem phony? He was caught between a rock and a hard place, with only one solution: create the most undeniably high-quality evidence of the creature that the world had ever seen. Not long after that, his superiors at the SCP Foundation would receive a video file from Dr. Renard. According to the notes on his report, he set up a track using an elk carcass to lure the creature out of the water and capture HD video of its feeding. When the senior researchers gathered around to watch the video, they were astounded. An animatronic, a cheap rubber suit around a somewhat janky robot, like something you'd see at a theme park. How much had Dr. Renard spent on this absurd farce? Did he think it was funny? Despite Dr. Renard's protests, he was reprimanded severely for this waste of Foundation resources. The object class on his 1933 file was switched to Explained, meaning a rational, non-anomalous explanation for the observed phenomenon had been found, discrediting it, and the 1933 slot was instead filled with a strange fat man dressed as Santa Claus, whose bodily fluids are all Irish cream, the ultimate humiliation. Dr. Renard was left with nothing, and we join him once again where we started, with Dr. Renard standing on the ledge of Okanagan Lake, staring hatefully into the water as something seemed to move underneath. If Dr. Renard screamed that night, there was nobody there to hear it. His remains were dredged out of the lake the next day. His official cause of death was listed as drowning after an unfortunate boating accident, though the boat in question was never found. Reports that his corpse was found half-eaten have mostly been dismissed as rumors. After all, there is no such thing as the Ogopogo. Now go check out SCP-1861, the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer, and the horror of body-stealing rain SCP-3300 for more ominous aquatic anomalies.